Good day, everybody. My name is Dennis Collier. I'm a registered dietitian with a master's degree in kinesiology, and the name of the course that I teach at the University of Toronto is Nutrition, Athletics, Performance, and Behavior. Now, usually I spend most of my time talking about the first three of those words, but for today's conversation, I really cannot help but think the main focus, the main message, has to center around that fourth and final word, behavior. Namely, how might a person behave after they are dealt an unimaginable adversity? Now, don't get me wrong, we still will talk about the first three things as per usual. After all, Patrick Anderson, after being dealt this adversity, went on to become one of Canada's most dominant athletes of all time in his sport. That sport being wheelchair basketball. Now, I don't want to tell too much of the story. I want to leave it to Patrick. But before we start the conversation, I want to leave you just with these three things. And there are three things that I heard Patrick himself say. So as you're listening to this conversation and thinking about these kind of things, like behavior, like adversity, sports, and dare I say, life itself, keep these three things in the back of your brain that, as I said, I heard Patrick himself say once upon a time. Number one, what can I do? Number two, what do I have to work with? And number three, how can we lean on one another? So, with those three things in the back of your mind, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to present this conversation with Patrick Anderson. But first, here is his athletic bio.
Quite simply, Patrick Anderson is the Michael Jordan of wheelchair basketball. He debuted for Canada at the 1997 World Junior Championships, where he led the team to a gold medal and was named tournament MVP. He has played in no less than 6 Paralympic Games, where he has totaled 3 gold medals plus 1 silver medal. Numerous other international medals, MVPs, leading scorer of tournaments. Frankly, Patrick has too many accolades to summarize quickly. A fitting end to his career, Patrick was named the flag bearer for Canada for the opening ceremonies of the 2024 Paralympic Games.
Patrick Anderson, please tell us where you were born and raised.
Two different answers. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, where my dad's from, but I grew up in Fergus, Ontario, which is kind of where my mom is from.
All right, now, Patrick, all of these interviews that I do with athletes start in the exact same way. I ask people where they're born and raised. And Patrick, my second question is always why their sport. For most athletes, this is, shall we say, not as profound of an answer as I think you're going to have. So we'll get the ball rolling, Patrick. And I'll just ask you, like I ask every athlete, but for you, I think we might have some unpacking to do on this question. Patrick, why wheelchair basketball?
Well, a couple names, Jeff Penner, and who you probably haven't heard of, and Michael Jordan.
Heard of the latter. I've heard of the latter.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll start with Jeff. I was a kid who played any sport I could get my hands on growing up, and particularly hockey. I loved hockey, played a lot, and I'm also, as I said, I was born in Edmonton, and so I grew up in the 80s watching Oilers games.
Oilers, there you go.
Winning the cup every year. Yeah, exactly. That's what we did. I'd watch the first period and fall asleep, Eastern time zone, and my dad would carry me up to bed. I'd wake up in the morning and ask him who won, and generally speaking, it was us. But when I was 9 years old in 1989, I had a car accident. I was hit by a drunk driver. I lost my legs below the knees on both sides. So I woke up a few days later in the hospital as a bilateral below knee amputee. And, we could talk about the ensuing sort of months and days, weeks and months of healing. But about a year later, mercifully, just a year later, thankfully, I was introduced to wheelchair basketball. And there were a few guys there, but Jeff Penner was one of those first coaches, and sort of my very first coach and the guy that introduced me to the sport. And I fell in love right away. It was a revelation to, after spending a year kind of sitting in a hospital wheelchair, having lost my independence, lost all my strength, my ability to, just get around independently, walk, let alone climb trees and skate and play hockey and all that. Suddenly, in a very dramatic way, it all came rushing back to me. That feeling of the wind in my hair and the wings that, like, when I wanted to go and do something, I could go do it. That's the way I felt on the basketball court the first time I played. Even though, from the outside looking in, you would think this kid's barely moving compared to how I move now and the type of wheelchair I'm in now and having had years to develop the skills and all that. But it was the feeling that I fell in love with, that feeling of independence rushing back into my veins and freedom. And so, I never looked back, and Jeff really shepherded those early years and made it fun. He made it challenging, both, and those are not mutually exclusive. He made the, the work fun and really launched me. And we can get to MJ in a minute, but it sounds like you wanted to say something.
No, I can't cut off MJ. Keep going with MJ.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, MJ will not be denied. If there's one thing about him, that's the truth. So I mentioned it was 89, so like 1990, I started playing. So that was sort of, Gretzky leaving Edmonton, heading to LA. And so my sort of interest in hockey waned as my interest in basketball grew. And that was the time that Michael Jordan was ascendant, right?
That was a great time in sports to be a kid.
That's right. And so some of the early 90s and his dominance and what he did on the basketball court, I just sort of fell in love with. And so while I was learning the art of and science of wheelchair basketball, I was also trying to mimic what I was seeing on TV from, like, every other kid would watch him play and then go in the backyard and trying to mimic it. And I was just trying to do it in a wheelchair, or sometimes running around on my knees or on my prosthetics when I ended up getting them. But mostly it was in my chair. And so his just whatever he had, the aura, the excellence, the swagger, everything was just kind of inspired me to want to chase that.
And this is like a year post-accident, you say. Is that right, Patrick?
That's when the ball got rolling. Yeah, I was 10 or 11. Yeah.
Do you mind, Patrick? I think there's some value if we get into a bit more of the detail of how a person overcomes such a thing.
Sure.
So I guess my introductory question. So you're 9 years old and this happens to you. I don't know, Patrick, if this is too profound an answer that you might have, but whatever you have to say, I think people would find very, very valuable. Do you have any strategies, any advice going through something like you went through? Like, what would you say to people that are dealing with this kind of catastrophic stuff going on in their life? Would you have any kind of words of wisdom on this topic?
Well, I should, right? But 30 something years to
or maybe, Patrick, another strategy is that you compartmentalize it and don't dwell on it. I mean, that might be a strategy too. But whatever you have to say, I think would be fascinating.
Well, yeah, I think it's hard to overstate the importance of what, for me anyway, going through losing my independence physically. There's a lot of different types of, trauma or struggles that people go through. But as far as overcoming that sort of loss of physical independence, you can't overstate how important the discovery and nurture of, like, a sporting outlet was for me. And so, the fact that, this club that Jeff was a part of, the Twin City Spinners in Kitchener-Waterloo, the fact that that was just down the road from Fergus, and I landed there, was a blessing. I don't know how you can, I guess working back from that, it was really the network of people around me. I mean, one really
a network of support,
like 1,000 sort of gracious things flowed from that, from the response of our community, our church, the Lions Club, my school, Don Cherry coming down to raise money, and then my principal
Wow.
telling me about this junior sports camp with the Spinners, which is how I ended up there on that court, feeling that sort of blood rushing through my veins again,
Mm.
coming alive again. Um, but that's just really the first early chapter. It's sort of like first love, and oh wow, it's all brand new, and you might have thought looking at me after that first weekend of playing wheelchair basketball that was it, like I was off to the races. I'd gone through this hard thing and now I found this outlet and I had a new horizon to chase and I was off, and but it wasn't really that simple because I still really struggled a lot with my loss of my legs and not only what that meant for me still like physically but also emotionally and I was a very self-conscious kid and I just wanted to fit in and my greatest fear growing up was like being in an assembly at school sitting on the ground and being my name being called and have to go up in front of the school and somehow having to try to
Oh,
get up
Jesus.
from sitting on the ground with my prosthetic legs and my butt sticking in the air and falling and just looking weird and awkward like so it sounds like a simple thing but that loomed so large in my head. So on the one hand I was really thriving and enjoying wheelchair basketball and recovering. Beyond recovering I was really thriving and in love with the sport and seeing a new side of myself, a new side of life. At the same time, then the next day after I'd have this great time of practice, the next day at school, I would just be weighed down with all these fears and being very self conscious
Mm.
and so
Let-
it took time to sort of to work through that. I remember this one and only time I wore my prosthetic legs to wheelchair basketball practice. Because there was a few years there, like in middle school or uh, junior high, where I wouldn't let anyone see me without my prosthetic legs. So like here I was at
mm.
wheelchair basketball practice, doing my thing. But when it came to school and girls, and just I didn't want to be seen without my prosthetic legs. I never wore shorts. I always wore long pants, and that lasted like a couple of years. And um, this one time I took my prosthetic legs and I wore them to wheelchair basketball practice, and it was the one and only time I ever did that. And that coach Jeff, he like pulled me aside and he's like, "Dude, he's like, this is great that you have prosthetic legs, but he's like,
So that so
those
this
things
is
are
a
going
faux
to weigh you
pas.
down out here." What's that?
This is a faux pas in the culture of wheelchair basketball. Don't wear your prosthetic legs. Is that correct?
I think he was sensitive enough to realize what there was more going on there than just like you're being stupid. It was I
Mm.
think he understood that there was a lot of there's more behind that. It was this part of my identity that I couldn't really let go of.
Mm.
Looking back at what I lost, and while he was trying to teach me to look ahead at what everything I could do, and what I had ahead of me. So he was sensitive about it, but
Hmm.
he's like, well, those things are only going to weigh you down. He's like,
Wow.
you got long arms and short legs. It's like it's the perfect recipe for wheelchair basketball. It's a perfect combination, and that's just dead weight. And he meant that literally, and I think he's also wise enough that he meant it metaphorically too. He's like,
Yeah.
and so that wasn't a once. I didn't go home the next day and recover. Leave a new man that night. But that was a real memorable moment. But it was also over time, wheelchair basketball had that sort of effect on me that it made me sort of more comfortable in my own skin, and it was a place where I could leave my prosthetics at home and just what I had was perfect. Maybe an overstatement, but was everything I needed to be an athlete and more.
Mm.
And that sunk in over my teenage years slowly but surely. It sunk into my identity that it's okay. I was missing something and it's okay to mourn that even now. I mean I'd love to have legs. I've never let go of that, but it's not going to happen in this lifetime. So basketball helped me sort of deal with that and move forward, but it took some time. So anyway, patience. When you ask like advice I have, I mean it can be a long road, and um, the people that you either find yourself surrounded with or seek out who can support you in the work and know when to sort of push you hit an obstacle that you can't sort of clear. The people with the kind of wisdom and love for you that know like when you need to be pushed a little bit to help clear some of these obstacles. Like in my case, the prosthetic legs, and know how to give me like a gentle kind of nudge, a little shove, and be like, hey, or a perspective that kind of helps me push through that. So I think it really is about the people around you, and you can't always control that, but to the degree that you can, it's important because it really is, it takes time and it takes a community.
Let me ask you, Patrick, this is going to be my final question. That's accident related. We are going to get into your unbelievable athletic career and how you become perhaps the greatest wheelchair basketball athlete of all time. We're going to get into all that. But I do have one last question because I think that your story is so unique and so interesting to have such a traumatic event like this. And Patrick, my first question on the topic was, let's say I asked it in a positive way. I'm now, this is the negative side of me, the pessimistic side of me, Patrick. And my question would be, did you ever at any point feel any resentment toward anything, I'll use that term deliberately, about the whole situation, any anger, those type of negative emotions? Was that a part of it for you, or is your personality such that you don't, those things don't register with you? My question is about the negativity of feeling, of the side effects of undergoing such a thing as you went through.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean,
because I think I'd be pretty pissed. That's my personality. Now, my brother, Patrick, on the other hand,
yeah.
he's much more happy-go-lucky than me. He takes the world as it comes. But I guess everyone's a different personality. So I'm just curious, was that a thing for you, anger, resentment, that this horrible thing happened to you?
I don't know if it's my temperament or the influence of, my parents but I think I was blessed to have like forgiveness modeled for me right off the bat. I mean, I'm a parent. My wife and I have 3 young kids, and our oldest is 9, so he's the age that I was when that accident happened. And when I think about it through their eyes now as a parent, I think they're the ones with the burden of like resentment and anger to deal with, right? And the fact that the way that they handled it and did not hang on to that resentment, but forgave these people that made this terrible mistake that had these consequences, was, I think, very important. And
I think, Patrick, the world might be onto something with that concept, forgiveness.
Well, yeah,
If we could,
but it's costly. It's not a cheap thing, and that the church that sort of rallied around us at that time in very spiritual but physical ways. Like, I'm one of 7 kids, so like, for sick kids hospital's an hour and a half from Fergus. So my parents were trying to juggle 6 other kids and my dad's job and everything else in our church and other people in the community and lots of people, but rallied around us to support us.
wow.
I don't think that forgiveness was just something that was baked into my mom and dad, but something that was nurtured in that community and reminding each other that's kind of what it's about. So when you're faced with something like that, and that, it's not necessarily easy to do, and you don't do it because I'll just say, like, I think getting that sort of, in a sense, out of the way early, that I wasn't going to dwell on my anger and resentment towards these people for what they'd done, was modeled for me by my parents, and that sort of freed me up. Now, did I ever experience resentment after that? Probably yes, but I felt like it was more like sadness and sort of frustration. Like, I tried to put roller skates on my prosthetic legs, and I went out at night where no one could see me, and it was just a total fail, but I had to try it. And I tried cross-country skiing, and I tried to do all these things on my prosthetic legs to try to win back what I'd lost, and it was just a dead end, and it was very frustrating. But thankfully it wasn't, I didn't get bogged down by resentment. I guess my mom says I was just kind of a bit like my son, a little bit like just too much energy to contain. So if that was going to be a dead end, and I was going to end up sitting on the floor and still have that energy, I was going to find an outlet at some point, some way, and it came through wheelchair sports and wheelchair basketball specifically.
So maybe we'll get into that now. Well, that's a nice segue, because after all, Patrick, what the purpose of these podcasts is sports science. So I do want to hear how we are going to get there. But your story is, look, it's an amazing story. What can I say? So I think people are interested. There's a lot of lessons to be taken, Patrick, out of what we just heard, I think. So I appreciate you sharing it, by the way. Let's start talking about sport itself. And I think, Patrick, the topic we're going to talk about now for the next few minutes is the topic that both you and I are very, very passionate about, which is how to develop the best possible athletes that you can. And in this case, we're talking about wheelchair basketball. So, Patrick, if I can get your brain to get ready here to conceptualize the time frame of age 9 to 21, okay? And I chose 21 for a reason. That was the year you first participated in the Paralympic Games, if my research is correct, the year 2000.
Correct. Yeah.
So let's talk about getting ready. What goes into developing a world-class wheelchair basketball player? And we can take this big period. I know it's a big period, but we'll take it in one chunk. Let's go back to that first year and that first coach who sounded fairly influential. Talk about him again, Patrick, and maybe pinpoint, if you can, because at this point you're 9. You're not thinking about the Paralympic Games yet, I don't think. What did this coach offer that made the sport so appealing, whereby you'd follow it to the point where 11 years later, now I'm actually a Paralympic athlete?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I was thinking about it already from that very first
Oh,
week.
really, eh?
Because, and this is part of the answer, is having some sort of role model. In some cases, that's someone, an Olympian might see one on TV, or like Michael Jordan was, like I already explained, was a role model. But Jeff and also Bruce Russell, who was there that weekend, they were both Paralympians from 1988 from the Seoul Games. So that very first weekend, they were already sort of pumping my tires and planting that seed in my imagination. Like, well, you got some talent, kid, and you got some long arms, and who knows, maybe if you work hard, maybe someday. And so they were bold enough to kind of just throw that out there, you know what I mean? It didn't turn me into a high-performance athlete overnight at the age of 10, but...
But let me just ask you something about something you just said, actually. And again, it gets back to my big question of why. You said you had long arms, and you've alluded to previously here in our chat about you kind of have the right frame for wheelchair basketball. Like why Patrick wheelchair? Were those reasons as to why you went the route of wheelchair basketball as opposed to anything else? Let's say wheelchair rugby or badminton or any of those types of things.
No,
were you kind of like a natural fit towards the sport of wheelchair basketball as opposed to those other sports?
I don't know about as opposed. I think under different circumstances, I would enjoy, tennis, or I did play sledge hockey for a couple of years and liked it sort of equally. That's adaptive para ice hockey, but it was just sort of historical circumstances. In Kitchener-Waterloo at the time, sledge hockey was very much a therapeutic rec sport. It hadn't really evolved, and so I was getting into it, and my brother was coming out, and my friends, and we started to play hockey. We started to run into each other and raise the puck, and that made some parents nervous about if their kids were going to get injured, and so I was bumping up against that kind of vibe at sledge hockey. And then
Not competitive enough.
Well, yeah, I would go to basketball, and I'd get smashed and fall out of my chair, and everyone would laugh, and someone would come and pick me up and throw me back in, and we keep going. And so after a couple of years of sledge hockey, I said, this isn't for me. But if I'd come along a couple of years later, that sport, it was still a pretty young sport compared to wheelchair basketball. It evolved very quickly, particularly in our area. And a couple of real legends came in the door, Brad Bowden and Billy Bridges, who are legends of ice hockey, just a couple of years younger than me. And we grew up playing basketball together. I was older, older brother type of guy. And they came and transformed the sport of sledge hockey. And I probably would have been part of that cohort if I were a couple of years younger. So in that sense, it was just the circumstances I was in. Wheelchair basketball had a great presence in Kitchener-Waterloo. And yeah, I was a good candidate. I had a nice touch, I think, naturally. Like I said, I had long arms. I'd probably be about 6'4", guessing, based on how tall my brothers are. But my wingspan is 6'7". And as I mentioned, I'm a bilateral below knee amputee, so I sort of have enough leg to keep me pretty stable in my chair when I strap in and get all installed in my chair. But I'm missing enough to have a nice power to weight advantage over people. So my combination of speed, pretty strong guy, but speed, quickness, and height was part of my formula. And I think people recognize that pretty early. And that's there's a lot to work with there.
So those are things that, let's call it, you have no control over. Just natural given characteristics. But there is some stuff you can control. And I think you and I might be on the same page on this too, Patrick. And what I want to get you to talk about now is the notion of, again, we're talking about training for sports.
Yeah.
And I would suggest, whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you're not in a wheelchair, there's a great advantage in playing against people that are better than you.
Hmm.
And from your point of view, we can talk about this in one of two ways. First of all, you were fairly young, I think, when you first got your taste of the senior team. I think you were still junior age, but you were good enough to play with the seniors. Is that right? Right, Patrick? You had a
I was almost 18 when I made the men's team.
okay. And in addition to the notion of playing against people that are older, better, more experienced than you, talk about, if you will, for a moment. And again, this might be something that anyone listening can take as a action step tomorrow or next week. Then the idea of able-bodied athletes
Hmm.
competing with adaptive athletes.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of my development. I feel like I'm jumping past Jeff a little bit here. I jumped past your earlier question
No,
because I
go
mean
back to Jeff.
this is just a chunk. I don't mean to belabor things, but this is the chunk.
Hmm.
this is
Yep.
this
Yep.
is what set me up for the next 20 years. And before I got to that, to be out there competing against people better than me and able-bodied players, Jeff really established, even pretty young, like made me work on my left hand and as well as my right hand and my fundamentals. And he would grab my teammate Jeff. Jeff was really instrumental in a lot of ways, but a lot of coaches in wheelchair sports, they have a training environment where they have a bunch of kids with a bunch of different levels of ability and quite a range of physical disabilities. And so they have to meet a lot of kids in different places and meet them where they are and their parents' expectations as well. And so how do you kind of support and challenge all these kids appropriately? It's much greater challenge than, say, a random sample of like run a 12-year-old hockey practice where all the kids are sort of, there's good, bad, and everything in between. We got a huge range here. So how do you keep Pat Anderson engaged and interested? And he was just masterful at that and managing sort of my expectations and my drive and pushing me. And like, saw when I was getting bored with team drills, he'd say, go to a side hoop and hit 5 left-handed layups. And when you're done, come back and join the group again. He would do that with my friend John and I. And he wouldn't do it in such a way that like, I'm here to train Pat and these other kids are second class. Like he really, really treated everybody equally and the parents equally, and just created a great environment to really bless everybody there, not just us. But so I was pushed, in that way, and because quite frankly, there weren't other kids in practice those first few years that were better than me. So it's like, and I wasn't really ready to play against adults. So it's like, how do you keep this kid going? So Jeff really managed those early years like really, really well. But yeah, and then in Canada, we've allowed able-bodied players to play up to the highest level that we have jurisdiction over for many, many years. Not forever, but that change sort of happened just before I came along in the early 90s. And so that meant just the talent pool just grew kind of overnight. And so I played with and against a lot of great able-bodied sort of teenagers through those years and some adults. And, some of the kids, it was not only like the physical challenge, it was also that me gaining a sense of myself as an athlete and seeing myself as a real athlete. Some of these kids I played against were really good able-bodied athletes, like the high school football quarterback. He was one of my teammates at Canada Games, and I played in front of him. It wasn't a guy who just sat in a wheelchair and played, decided to play Canada Games. He's a guy who'd been playing a number of years and training just like me, and yet I was holding my own against, he happened to be like a really good athlete and a little older than me, and I'm holding my own against guys like that. And it gave me, it quelled some of those fears, like, I'm just a good disabled athlete. I'm not a good athlete. And so I'm chasing this thing. I'm going to be a great disabled athlete, And I got a sense of like, no, you know what? If I hadn't lost my legs, I probably could have, if I wanted to and worked hard, made it in another sport. And it sort of meant something to me to kind of like experience that. And that's not to say like great athletes in the U.S. who don't grow up playing against able-bodied athletes are held back by that. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I'm just saying as part of my experience, I think that was important to me. And so, yeah, I think that's part of, Team Canada as a small country. We've always punched above our weight and we won a lot of medals. Part of it, I think, was that culture back home of these great able-bodied players who really invested in the sport and deepened the talent pool, gave back as coaches, administrators, all kinds of things, volunteers, refs. So just have sort of a deeper, broader talent pool to draw from. Yeah. So Jeff, I got one last thing about Jeff is I have to tell this story just because this is when you ask about like what it takes, it really is coaching. Like 9 times out of 10, it's coaching.
Yeah.
And I could barely get the ball to the hoop when I started, and that was fine. And I got a little bit stronger every year, and I'd push it up there like a chest pass, and I get a little bit more consistent, a little bit more consistent. And after a couple of years, I was, hitting 4 out of 10, and I was pretty happy with myself. And Jeff let that go for a little while, and then one day he said, "Listen, you need to learn how to shoot properly." And he sat me under the hoop, and he made me shoot properly. He taught me like, beef, elbow in, and all this kind of stuff. And he made me shoot little 6-inch shots. And he said, when you can hit 10 in a row, you can move back 6 inches. And then you can hit 10 in a row from a foot, and then you can move back, And at first I was very frustrated, right? Because it was definitely, taking a step back. But again, like great coach, he picked the right time. When it was time to scrimmage, I could just do whatever I wanted. He didn't suck all the fun out of it. It was just the right time to push me in that way. And he built my shot up. And without that intervention, there's no way my career looks the same. Absolutely not. And so he's willing to be the bad guy, to take my suffer my wrath and my withering looks and stuff like that, and rolling my eyes and like, oh, I don't want to do this. He was willing to take that because he wanted to give me a gift and realize, like, coaches and teachers and parents need to, that's what we have to do sometimes if we want to give something to our kids,
And remind us, what age we talking here? You're what age to what age with Jeff?
That's still early. Sorry, I'm going slow here, but that's maybe I was 13 or something like that, which is a little late, right? That's you wouldn't expect a kid, an able-bodied basketball player, to be just learning how to shoot at that point. But
do you have any memory, Patrick, of, because I like to be specific, how in terms of time, how much in terms of practice are you doing at this point?
Well, practicing with the team once a week until later on, it would have been twice a week in later years of high school, because it's just hard to find those opportunities. But I was playing basketball every day, and this is, I think, part of why my career lasted
Unstructured, you mean? Is that right?
Yeah, because I learned how to do that, and Jeff taught me a little bit how to do that, how to be creative in the practice gym and have fun with it, and with a basketball and a wall and just what kind of passes you could practice, and so my teenage years, I was playing basketball every day. Just sometimes it was with my friends in the backyard. I was running around on my knees. Sometimes, again, I was on my prosthetic legs, making the best of it. Sometimes I was in my chair trying to keep up at school and intramurals. So it didn't look like an able-bodied kids. My nephew plays basketball now. It's like 5 days a week, and there's run. You can go to the YMCA and get a run anytime you want. So you could play 20 times a week if you wanted. It just didn't have that, so I had to get good at training by myself or in small groups. And
I think, Patrick, there's a ton of value in that too, though, man. The idea of the unstructured, just be creative, figure stuff out. My goodness, what a value in that.
Totally. And it was a really interesting time because the chairs were evolving really at that time. So more camber and anti-tip wheels came into play. And so before that, you tip over a lot. But then the rules changed to allow anti-tip wheels. So now I could play with my center of gravity and get more nimble. And, players like me started strapping into the chair much more tightly so that when we went, so we started tilting up on one wheel. So it was a real time of innovation and chair-wise and skill-wise. And that's when I was a teenager, when you're just soaking that stuff up. And so that's another sort of historical circumstance that is kind of unique.
And that topic too, this is the chairs. My goodness, that's an area beyond my expertise, to be honest. But
Right.
that's a whole other sports engineering. Certainly a sports science, but it's engineering, Patrick, really, how these chairs have evolved over the span of your career.
Yeah, it's really, if you're into that kind of stuff, it is really interesting. And, like I said, that was a particular era of innovation. I mean, if you look at the chairs now go back 10 years and look at the chairs in 2024 and look at the chairs now, they're pretty much the same.
Oh.
They haven't really changed that much. You look at the chairs like between, say, the year 1990 and 2000, it's a huge change.
That was the era of innovation, as you said.
Yeah, or maybe going back a little bit more, maybe mid 80s to late 90s, but they got lighter, they got more nimble, the strapping changed, all this, the installation in the chair got much more sophisticated. And when I was starting out, most guys didn't. It was a fun way to visualize it. When I started out in the early 90s, guys still generally weren't strapping into their chairs, so if there was a big impact, I ran into somebody.
You go flying.
Yes, I would go flying in one direction, and my wheelchair would go flying in a different direction. That's a big
Could be,
explosion, right?
it's a
So
good
fast
visual
forward,
though.
what's
It
that?
sounds exciting. It's a good visual.
Well, that's what drew me to it. It was like I said, everyone was laughing. Like, wow, I was like, get the measuring tape out, see how, and then you
Let's
keep going. But what changed was like once we started strapping in. Now, like by the time I was, making the national team, I was strapped right in tight, and so big impact happens. I go flying, my chair goes with me. We're like a roll cage. So both exciting, depending on your taste for wheelchair impact, accidents. But so that was, yeah, that's a good way to visualize like, how the chairs changed a lot in the game, and so it was a really innovative time. And so I had a lot, in other words, a lot of like sort of to work with and by myself doing that sort of unstructured play. And there was a lot going on, and I was seeing
lots of
things.
value.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot to draw from and be inspired by.
Let's move forward here in our timeline. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I think I might have an answer. I don't know if you would agree, but I'm going to ask you, Patrick, was there a moment along this trajectory? We haven't got to the Paralympics yet.
Uh,
Was there a moment along this period when it really hit home for you that, wait a second, I'm really, really good at this? Okay. I know you said, even from day one, um, you're thinking in the back of your mind, hey, the Paralympics is a thing I might attain one day. But you're 9, and who knows? My question is, was there a singular moment, an event maybe, whereby you said, this really might be a thing that I'm going to be really, really good at? Do you have an answer?
um, yeah,
97
I think I do actually, because
World Under 23s? No? You were the MVP?
I think it was a little earlier than that. Yeah,
Even earlier than that.
yeah, I think it was Canada Games in '95.
Canada Games 95.
Yeah, I think people have been pumping my tires from the beginning.
Hmm.
So I've had to deal with that temptation to pride or whatever. But again, yeah, you're right. I was young, and who knows. But in '95, I was 15 at Canada Games, and I was playing against the cutoff was like 24. So I was playing against some pretty old kids, adults, young adults, old adults. I don't know.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
held my own. And
Men.
so for me, it was a real awakening. Like, oh, I can really do this at a high level against the best in the country. And it also was an eye opener to just how special this generation of talent was that was coming up. And these guys that were my competitors at Canada Games were going to be my teammates with Team Canada, World Juniors, and then at national team. And started to crystallize in my mind, like, oh, we got a special era coming up here. And I met some of those guys for the first time at Canada Games. I'm like, this is going to be fun.
And that
And
was a
the other
good
thing
era.
too, like I was in 10th grade or something. That's the age kids are starting to do, lifestyle experimentation, and kids are smoking dope and stuff like that. And I'm like, I had to decide, you know, that wasn't going to be my path, because if I had to take this seriously, there was drug testing and all that. So for me, that was my awakening. Like, I'm on this sport path with all the opportunities, but also sacrifices that entail. So that was a real pivot point for me.
So at that point, you're getting good. I'm going to read a quote to you from one of your teammates. Okay. Uh, this on the name of this quote would be "On the Greatness of Patrick Anderson." He doesn't do anything where we'd say, "This is how you teach it."
That's Nick Gonchin, 100%. Is this a game
But
show? Did I win? What did I win?
oh, I can't disclose my sources. But that was the quote about the game of Patrick Anderson, what he does that makes him one of the greatest wheelchair basketball players of all time. This teammate says, well, he doesn't do anything where you'd say that's how you teach it, but yet the results are the
Uh-huh.
results. And Patrick, it might speak to some of the things that we talked about previously, the idea of creativity. I don't want to put words in your
Yeah.
mouth, but I don't know. Comment on that quote by a teammate and try, if you can. I know it's hard to critique your own game, eh?
Yeah.
But based on what we just heard there, but one of your esteemed teammates,
Well,
what
it's
would
an
you?
interesting prompt, because there is a grain of truth in that. I think in that having a combination of quickness and size allowed me to take certain risks maybe that you wouldn't teach. Like an example might be, I might let somebody get somewhere
Hmm.
in order to, because I know that they're going to be in trouble when they get there. Whereas like maybe a
Hmm.
smaller player or someone doesn't have my length, my long arms, or my ability to tilt or something might say just keep them out of the key. Whereas I might let them in there and dare them to pass the ball in because then I'm going to deny a high percentage chance, or I'm going to jump the passing lane. And so I think that much is true. Like when you have certain advantages, you try to find ways of leveraging them. That wouldn't necessarily apply to all athletes. It wouldn't be maybe the textbook way of approaching it, the play or whatever. If does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's part of it. I think also, yeah, like
It's hard to define, I know.
what's that?
It's hard to define, especially when you're self-critiquing. But
Yeah, I mean, I think I know where that comes from. It's kind of like a loaded comment in a way, but because
man,
I've heard that before, and I'm like, that's not true. And ultimately I would say I don't. I think I had such a good, like Jeff taught me real good fundamentals skill wise, and then when I went to Illinois and played for Mike Frogley, who was our national team coach as well, so I got to play for our national coach every day for 4 years at the University of Illinois, where he was my college coach, and he really taught me to think through the game and learn how to play it 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5, and I had this great foundation of individual skills from Jeff, and then Frog really built on that. And so I think I did have a lot of I would say and habits, good habits that were built by Frog, that you would teach. But I do some of those things, take some of those maybe higher risk, higher reward type of try those kind of plays and make those plays and get away with it because of my length or whatever. So I
I'm
think
sure, Patrick, some of that comment was meant tongue in cheek. He
that much
wasn't.
is true. Oh no, I know how it was meant. Uh, yeah.
All right, so we're doing an unbelievable job here of getting up to the point where you're now one of the best in the world. For the next little part of the interview, okay, we're going to start talking about what I'll call the Paralympic era. And we're going to further break it down, Patrick, into two eras. One, the first one from 2000 to 2012, I will call the Dynasty era, which is really what you guys were during that time. 3 gold medals, not too shabby. And the Paralympics were only every 4 years, by the way. And then you had a hiatus, and you come back. So we'll talk about both these eras, and that'll be fantastic as well to talk about, because now we're going to speak about an elite of the elite athlete. Before we do that, Patrick, so we haven't really done this yet, and I think this would also be helpful. Um, let's be honest, probably a lot of listeners, they're not entirely familiar with the whole sport of wheelchair basketball. And now that we're up to the level, like the highest possible level, the Paralympics, can you describe for us a little bit about the eligibility criteria, okay, of what makes someone able to participate in the Paralympics? And then furthermore, we got to talk about wheelchair basketball specifically, all the nuances, Patrick, of what kind of guys you're allowed to put on the floor at any one given time. So there's some interesting things, I think, here about these topics. Can you share some of the nuance of what meets the eligibility to participate in the Paralympics?
Sure, yeah. So you're talking about eligibility and then classification. So taking
Right.
eligibility first, um, it's to some degree negotiable and it's changed over time. It changed very recently, thanks to the International Paralympic Committee initiative. But essentially, you have to have a lower body impairment of some kind that's significant enough to prevent you from not only playing able-bodied basketball, but sort of playing it at a competitive level.
So you're
So
speaking about basketball specifically now.
that's the way I think it's framed. So
Okay.
so that means like if um,
But you said lower body, so if you have an upper body,
yeah, so if your legs are totally fine, you're missing a hand or something, that does not qualify you for wheelchair basketball. But so you have to be, so an amputee where you're missing part or both of your like feet or legs, paraplegics, and other like congenital cerebral palsy, spina bifida, um, polio. Not so much in Canada, but other parts of the world still. I grew up playing against a lot of guys with polio or had polio as kids. And so and so one of the things that changed recently was leg length discrepancy. So we had Captain Canada for a lot of years, a guy named David Ing, who had a leg length discrepancy. One of his legs was longer than the other, and so he played on our team for 4 Paralympics, and then they changed the rules, like how much of a leg length discrepancy you had to have, and he got booted out of the Paralympics. So that's what I mean when I say like it's not written in stone forever. But that's the idea of eligibility. So you end up with this pool of athletes that has quite a span, from very minimally disabled, missing a big toe, for instance. So you wouldn't even know seeing them on the street. Someone with a very bad knee injury that never quite healed right. Those type of athletes can be eligible. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, you'd have everything up to like a pretty high paraplegic. I can't give you the exact spinal cord level, but basically before your arms and your hands start to get affected. In fact, I'm sure you're familiar with wheelchair rugby. That was invented in Canada by some wheelchair basketball players, quadriplegics, who basically were sitting on the bench. They couldn't get onto the court because they were great athletes, but they had this functional ability disadvantage vis-a-vis the paraplegics out there and everyone else. But the paraplegics who they're competing against for court time just had this advantage. So like, forget this, we're going to create our own sport. And so they created wheelchair rugby.
Did not know that.
Wheelchair basketball has everything from this, so he's minimally disabled on one hand, to the other end of the spectrum, a high paraplegic, full function in their chest and arms and shoulders and legs and hands, but very little to no sensation or function below the chest all the way down. And so that's your population. Well, how do you make that fair? Because me playing one-on-one against a paraplegic, I just have this inherent physical advantage. That has nothing to do with my talent, has nothing to do with my skill, my dedication, my smarts, or anything. I'm just like stronger and have more balance and could run circles around that player. And so that's not fair. So how do we create a structure to make a sort of level the playing field? So that's where the classification system comes in. So everyone is assigned a point value based on their level of functional ability. On one end of the spectrum is me, minimally disabled, 4.5. The other end of the spectrum would be a 1.0. And there's everything in increments of 0.5 in between. So 1.1, 1.52, 2.53, 3.54, 4.5. When you go to put 5 players on the court, your total number of points can't exceed 14 points at the Paralympics. So you can't put 5 amputees out there. You have to find a balance of players that add up to 14 or less.
So this is a huge strategy.
Our best 4 was 13.5 points. So just our best 5 guys. So we played under, and that's fine too, but you can't exceed 14. So it creates this level playing field so that it's not about functional ability or luck of the draw and whether the car broke your back or the car took your legs off. It's about your skill, your talent, your dedication, all that kind of stuff. And if you excel in those areas, then you'll get on the court and you'll have an impact.
But there's certainly a strategy, I would guess, in determining the mix of guys. Like hockey is, I guess, my main sport, Patrick. And people talk about the line combinations that are, this mix of guys. But this is at another level of consideration. Like you're adding up the point value, literally, of the guys you got to put on the court.
Yeah, it's talent development. It's like how you pick 12. You got to pick 12 players that you can make lineups with, not just necessarily your 12 most talented players or whatever it is. So, it's sort of a response to your talent pool in your country or wherever you're drawing from. Also, there's sort of historical trends. Back when we were winning medals, it was the best teams like us, the Aussies. Well, us in particular would play 2 big 4.5s like me and Joey, 2 big 4.5s, a midpoint player, a 2.5, Richard Peter, and then a couple of class 1s. Fast forward 20 years, the teams that are dominating right now, namely the USA and Great Britain, they basically have 1 4.5 and 1 class 1 and then 3 very elite midpoint players. And so the total amount of speed and chair skills and functional abilities spread out more evenly among their 5 players. We're a little bit more peaks and
what you just described to me sounds kind of like what's happening in the NBA. Like the role of the big man is not what it used to be.
It's a little bit of that, yeah.
There's guys who can shoot and move.
Yeah. That's I guess there's a few things going on there, but yeah, there's certainly like big guys have to be able to play in open space and be fast. They can't just be big.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a time, yeah, we'd just be a big guy and be relatively slow and get to your spot and do your thing. And now the game is so full court,
So
so much
fast.
speed out
Yeah.
there. You have to be fast, and that's one of the reasons why not a lot of teams, why that trend is happening. Is not a lot of teams that can put two really elite, big, fast players out there, and then also have their class ones be fast enough to be able to match up. So there's a little bit of like sort of luck involved in that too. Like if you have good classifications, you know, Great Britain, one of the best players in the world. He's a fantastic player. Totally, he's just like a fighter. He's a little dude, but he's a fighter. Amazing shooter. He happens to be a class, basically a 4.5 like me, but he's sort of missing part of his hand, so his class goes all the way down to class 2. And when everyone watches him, they're like, "That's a good classification for Greg," because he is, I mean, an incredible class 2. And so, like, the difference between him and I, that's 2.5 points that you can then use somewhere else on the court to bring more functionability and speed. And that's just sort of the luck of the draw. They sort of won. They won that. That worked out well for them. And so it's a little bit random. Some people might say political because it's people making these calls, and some of them are subjective, not strictly objective on what your classification is. That gets into sort of the politics of sport and how things actually work, but that's probably a different discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of topics we could discuss. But let's talk about, as I call it, the dynasty era. Are you comfortable with that term, by the way? The dynasty? From
Yeah.
2000, 2012. Yeah,
Let's
of
do it.
course you were.
Use it.
And put it this way, for the anyone just listening to this, to try to research and pick out all the accolades of Patrick Anderson during this period, it's like, what do I even talk about? So all I'm going to say, I'm going to put it open to you. Let's talk about 2000, first Paralympics. What are some memories of this initial gold medal?
Well, one is that I certainly, yes, have got most of the accolades, or a lot more than even, well, more than I think I deserve. And that part of
More
that
than you
is,
deserve.
that's kind of always what happens. Well, that's
Come
what
on,
happens
buddy.
in team sports.
Come on,
I don't mean
buddy.
to be falsely humble. I know I was a big part of it, but it's always a little bit of an awkward fit to single out one person in the team sport. But also, like, you know, the Paralympic movement is really, the media coverage and savoir faire and understanding of it has grown. Once upon a time, you know, somebody's like, "Oh, I'm covering the Paralympics today," and they hand you a sheet, and like, who do I need to know? And like, yeah, just talk about Pat Anderson, you know, or the guy who jumps out because I'm like tall and fast, but not necessarily knowing the sport well enough to know how all the pieces fit together and how much value some of these other guys have. So a little bit of captive of the moment, what you're seeing with your eyes. And so I think as the coverage of the sport has become more sophisticated, it's an opportunity to sort of appreciate more athletes. And so I think if our dynasty happened now, the love would have been spread out a little
Oh,
bit,
man.
a little bit
It
better.
would have been much, much bigger.
Well, bigger too, yeah. And also, I think everyone would real, you know, you could Google Joey Johnson, and he's got a pretty big profile too, and he's in a lot of Hall of Fames. But it'd be even bigger because I think,
It would be
more
bigger,
special,
man.
even more special than people realize in the moment. Anyway, Sydney was like the most fun, crazy group of players I'd ever been on. Like we just,
Is that true, eh?
yeah, we
That
were.
particular group?
It was a really talented wave, but a lot of characters and a lot of energy that could have been dissipated in a lot of different areas. And that's, I think, where Mike Frogley really showed his value as our coach during that time. He really sort of taught us to the degree that it was possible at the time, given that we weren't like playing 82 games a year together and able to really refine things. It was a camp here and a camp there and a competition there. But he had a few of us at college and taught us. You know, Frogley or Joey Johnson was also, I played for him at Whitewater before Frog came to Illinois and coached me. So a few of us had played for him at college, and then he sort of whipped us into shape and really made something that was greater than the sum of its parts, and the parts were pretty great. And so we had a lot of fun on the court, and we had a lot of fun off the court with that group. And you know, we also were sort of we meant business in 2000. In '98, I was 18. I was actually, you know, I was an all-star, and I was the leading scorer at Worlds in '98. But we finished third, and we deserved to win. And we had all gone out and like dyed our hair and had like red maple leaves in the back, all but a couple of us. The two
What color did you dye your hair?
like blonde, like bleach blonde. And so we were that in '98. We were that team. We were like, we're showing up. We're here. New to the party. We're going to stir, you know, the straw that stirs the drink kind of thing. And we're all feeling ourselves. And had a fine showing. I personally kind of had a coming out party. But 2 years later, my teammate Jamie, who was a starter, and he was one of the guys who didn't dye their hair. He was talking to us before, and he was like, "Guys, forget." I
Let's
said,
get serious here.
"Yeah." He was like, "Forget the hair. It's not about the hair. We're here to win a gold medal." And he struck the right note, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." And
You
so
need
we
someone like
we
that.
we were sort of new, but we were like ready. We were ready to like not just show up and show how good we could be, but like to actually dominate and win in
Hmm.
2000. But had a crazy amount of fun doing it.
And the following quad, you won that one as well. How many guys carried over, Patrick?
Quite a lot. I
Was,
can't tell you exactly, but
but it was basically the same group?
it was a lot. But in between, we lost in like double overtime at Worlds in 2002 in the semis to the U.S. And that was that really fueled us in '04.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't total dominance all, for sure. The U.S. were nipping at our heels, and Australia was always good in that era too.
And then I hate to ask, what happened? 2008.
Oh wait.
What happened, man?
Well, one thing that happens is the Aussies never went away, and they were great, and they had
That's
great
right.
older talent. They had some great younger talent. I mean, they have their own dynasty to speak of from like around that time through. They won back-to-back worlds after that, and so Australia happened, quite
Yeah.
frankly. But also, we won worlds in '06, and that was the final thing for me that I checked off. And so, in my box of accomplishments, and I felt a real internal change at '06 that never. It was sort of a before and after moment for me in my life and career. Like before that, it was just. I've explained it before as like this rubber band snapped, and a rubber band I didn't realize was inside of me, like how tight it was, and suddenly it wasn't that tension wasn't there anymore. It was like, oh, like this need to like win this thing to. I didn't realize I was checking boxes. It turns out I was, and so my motivation really shifted and changed in a lot of different ways. Like after that,
Did anything cause that?
I think because we finally won at Worlds in 2000. '98 was third. '02 we were the favorites coming off the gold medal in Sydney, and we lost that dramatic game, and so it was that last hurdle to clear
Hmm.
personally and as a program. So I think we had a bit of a letdown after that. I took a year off from the team and went to music school and moved to BC and started to try to learn jazz guitar unsuccessfully, but I was exploring other things. And so when I came back before, I played in a different chair. I went from sitting in a really big chair to try to maximize my height, that height and speed combination, to playing in a smaller chair, just for kind of like traded in my SUV for a Ferrari, just because it kind of goes back to, and I still have a chair like that I use sometimes, but my first love of wheelchair basketball wasn't actually the basketball. It was the wheelchair. It was the feeling of freedom and the wind in my hair and to be able to move. And I think that's part. That's an even bigger thing that sustained me even more than the Michael Jordan inspiration. It was just the feeling of movement. It's like I want to go in that
Wow.
direction fast. I can do it. A bit of
I can.
dance, a bit of performance, a bit of all that. And so I was playing with that. I felt kind of free to do what I wanted at that point. So I started to play with that. And anyway, in Beijing, maybe that was maybe a factor. I went back to the big chair like 3 months before, and it probably wasn't enough time to really get my body ready. I was a little bit
Hmm.
wobbly, I would say, compared to how I'd been before. So not to make excuses, though. Like I said, at the end of the day, the Aussies
Are really good
we
too.
had a really dramatic semifinal win against the U.S. in overtime, and we probably thought because they were the team we'd struggle with leading up. We thought maybe once that was taken care of, the Aussies, who we'd been beating pretty regularly,
All
were
right, let's
a
go.
foregone conclusion. So we failed a pretty important test there. Like don't count your chickens before they're
But
hatched.
you do come back, and in 2012,
Speed up here. Yeah,
you win again.
yeah.
Do you know, Patrick, in 2012 that you're going to take a hiatus? Gold medal.
Well,
What's your mind frame at this
no, I
point?
took a break after 2012. I actually thought I tried to retire after 2008, and a lot of that was just emotional. I was pretty bitter about the result, and some personal rivalry with one of the Aussie guys probably got in my head a little bit or something. I was just a little bit lost, I would say, personally, and so I actually kind of tried to retire. But then I came back, and I met
I
my
didn't
in
know
that
that.
period I met my wife, and I started visiting New York City, and but then London. I started hearing about the London Games. It was going to be a real seminal moment for the Paralympic movement. The media coverage in the UK, Channel 4 picking it up. You know, it was, broadcasts of the Paralympics have traditionally been like, oh, the CBC wants the Olympics because it's good business. I'm like, well, you have to cover the Paralympics as well. Like, okay, we'll do the Paralympics too. Same thing with, say, BBC in the UK. Channel 4 came along, which is like a smaller cable channel, and they're like, said to the BBC, you can have the Olympics. We want the Paralympics. We think we can do a good job of this and sell it and have the Olympics. We want the Paralympics. So I heard about that, and I just, a few other things, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a big moment for the Paralympics, a big show, and I should probably be there. A little bit of vanity, self-importance or something. Like, yeah, if we're going to be putting on a big show, I want to be part of that show. And so that part drew me back. And after we won that, yeah, it was amazing. My wife was there. We were married by that point, and it could have been the end of my career for sure. But after that, I decided to take a break. I was very clear I didn't want to like retire and unretire again because I wasn't sure, but I wanted to take a break. And my wife, we started having kids, and so I was
that changes things.
Squad, and I skipped Rio. Yeah.
But you do come back then for the last two, and that's the other segment that I wanted to talk about. The motivation, Patrick, for coming back at the age of, what are we now? So you're 2020, you are 39?
I came back in 2017, right after Worlds, so I would have been like...
Oh, you came right back after. Oh, right
or
back
not
after.
Worlds, right after Rio. So
you were back in 2017.
Yeah. I was,
okay.
36, 37.
Yeah. So talk a bit about, because now, by the way, Patrick, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm in the same boat as you, buddy, so don't take it too personally. This is my physiological expertise. We're getting older.
You don't say.
We're getting older. I'm sorry to tell you that. There's a difference in training as a late 30s athlete, and also will include this period. This is the second period of your career that I want to talk about, post Rio, shall we say? When you come back for a fifth and a sixth Paralympic Games, when you're in your late 30s, and I'm Patrick. Actually, your last one, you were how old? 40.
The summer 45. I turned
45
in Paris. Yeah.
Mid 40s, no less.
Mid 40s. Well, wheels age gracefully.
Definitely. But let's talk about some of the challenges, the differences you find going back to the early days of your career, now trying to maintain that high level of performance as an athlete in his a 40-year-old athlete.
I mean, it's not very sexy, but it's rest and recovery, and it's injury prevention. And so there are ways I would have maybe at times liked to push myself a little bit further, but I bumped up against those things, and increasingly in the last few years especially. So being realistic about that, but also being still hungry to find ways to continue to stay sharp or even improve. And I would say a couple things about these last couple of years. One is I've had the most sort of complete and best team of integrated services team. Is that what we call it?
Oh, yeah.
Physio,
sure.
Strength and conditioning coach, mental performance coach.
Absolutely.
So the most amount of that I've had, which sort of a necessary, which has been nice because, a lot of my training the last 6-7 years has been either by myself or with Steve Serio, who's the captain of the U.S. team. He lives in New York, and we, another historical circumstance. He doesn't move back to New York, and we start hanging out, become friends, and training together. I don't know if my career would have lasted this long either, but there's a lot of sort of self-guided training, but from a distance, I got a lot of support from them, and they helped me negotiate these last 6-7 years of me aging and figuring out what that means and how I can try to stay elite without breaking down. And it's part of the response is like skill-wise, like I actually think I played. I don't know. People might debate this. I think I played better in Paris than in Tokyo. Part of that's maybe COVID. Maybe we all didn't have our best in Tokyo. I'm not sure.
They were weird games.
I felt better. My shoulder felt better, so I felt less nagging things felt less nagging. And also I really focused on, you get older in basketball, it's a little harder to get to the basket. So what did MJ do? He developed the fadeaway, So I'm not saying I'm the MJ, but right to the bitter end, he's an inspiration. And so, I tried to refine that part of my game, and that was responsive. I think I kind of sharpened that part of my game. And so right to the very end, even in my mid-40s, I found ways to try to actually get better, not just sustain or not maintain or get too worked up and about things that are slipping away beyond my control, but try to fight back time, and at the same time find some ways to get even better. And that going right back to Jeff Piner, that was always fun for me. And that comment on my game, like, you wouldn't. I do things you wouldn't teach.
You wouldn't teach
that
this
partly comes like this is from this part of my career, because this coincides maybe with me getting a smartphone kind of late to the game and getting on Instagram and YouTube and trying to share some of the things I do in the practice gym. And it's pretty clear I do a lot more ball handling, for instance, a lot more dribbling than you might.
I've seen some of those.
Need to do. What's that?
I've seen some of those clips. It looks pretty wild.
Yeah, and so, but it really is a picture of, yes, how you.
Some of it looks like a circus performer, to be honest, Patrick.
Well, exactly. So I think sometimes I take that a little too far, and it probably bled into my game a little bit. Like, you could dribble 50% less and be just as effective or even more effective. But you know what? That's maybe just the cost of 30 years of, like, it's got me pretty far, and I've done pretty well with it. So you can quibble with the approach, but I'm trying to find new ways of doing new tricks and to push myself. And if that leads to a little bit of overcomplicating things at times, then that's just, for me, one of the things I got to battle against. But yeah, that's what it's felt like. The rest and recovery is everything. Like and that's
rest and recovery,
like mental performance, because sometimes I really beat myself up. But when I started to kind of realize that, like, there was a pattern here. When I had rest, I played pretty well, and when I didn't, there was a greater chance of me playing not well.
Folks,
it doesn't mean I'm perfect when I was rested, but I was like, okay, that's all right. I can take that load off my mind. Like, oh, I'm falling apart. It's like, no, I just need more rest. Or in the absence of rest, I need to reset my expectations for what I can deliver. So,
all right, Patrick. Believe it or not, we've flown through time here. We're at the end of the journey.
Because I talked your ear off.
No, but we're not quite done the journey yet. So, as you walk off the court this summer, okay, it just happened a few months ago.
Wheel off.
Wheel off. Sorry, yes, wheel off. You wheel off the court. This past summer, it's all said and done now. Talk about the memories of that particular moment as you close the book on this unbelievable career in wheelchair basketball.
Well, one, it was just beyond sort of precious to be able to share that with my wife and 3 young kids, and them up in the stands, and the hugs after every game, win or lose, and their excitement when we were winning and tears when we were losing. Just their emotional experience was just amazing to see, and there was, we're feeding them.
And by the way, because you guys, was it fair? You guys weren't expected to do that great. Would you say that's fair this time around?
I'd say that's pretty fair. I think after the tournament, everyone was like, well, Canada peaked at the right time. And
yeah, you guys had a great performance.
I don't know what to do with that. It's sort of leveled as a bit of like damning with faint praise or whatever. But yeah, we caught a wave and we rode it, and we got blown out by GB and US. But everyone, it was the best of the rest tournament. GB and US were playing for first and second, and then the best of the rest, we almost won that. And
almost.
So it was anyway, sweet. We were sweet that we rode that wave, and bitter that it ended like that. But even still, I'll just remember, my teammates just really playing their best when it counted most. Like in our quarterfinal game, we had the best team game we had in 8 years, and that was amazing. And I remember my wife and kids being there and being part of it. And, like after the German game, like right as the buzzer was sounding, one of the young guys who played real well for them came up and grabbed me before I got away, and he's like, "You came and taught a camp in Germany in 2011."
Wow.
There, and it was inspiring, and
that's pretty cool.
And I got some of that stuff, which really meant a lot too. It was in the moment after he just beaten me. Yeah, it was just
That's pretty cool.
All things said and done, that's pretty nice to hear. Yeah.
Like I said, I can't say it enough. You cannot overstate an unbelievable career. And an unbelievable interview, Patrick. I appreciate greatly your time doing this here today. But we are not done, Patrick. Do you have time to hang around to play? Can you read this?
Patrick Anderson, 10 questions.
I think, Patrick, I need to get
this far. Let's see.
I need to get a better graphic of some kind.
Yeah, maybe
this is not
maybe a Sharpie.
I don't know. But anyway, this is not my area of expertise. But, Patrick, the quality of the questions in here is
Uh-huh.
what.
That's where you're
This is what really matters. So anyway, but in all seriousness, I do appreciate your time. I always play 10 questions to finish up. And all we're going to do, Patrick, the game is, I got 10 questions for you. Some of them, some of them are about basketball. Some of them are not, and it's just like short little answers off the top of your head, whatever you think. What if you have a funny story? It's just 10 questions, and that's the game. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so here we go. 10 questions. Question number 1, and actually, Patrick, this is a first here. We have, through the miracle of modern technology, we have a musical interlude to kick off
Okay.
10 questions with Patrick Anderson. We're going to play, Patrick. Name this artist. Patrick, what? Can you explain? What are we? Who are we? What are we listening to here? Is that? What are we listening to, Patrick? That's your.
Beauty. That is a singer-songwriter.
The Layawakes.
Yeah.
And a singer-songwriter.
Husband and wife.
Husband and wife.
Yeah. Anna, my wife.
And their names are.
Well, professionally, Anna Paddock and Patrick Anderson, and
Oh my goodness.
maritally, Anna and Patrick Anderson. Yeah.
Patrick, so we spent an hour and a half talking about basketball. We might need to schedule another hour and a half talking about music. But anyway, folks, yes, it's true. This guy not only is he the greatest wheelchair basketball player of all time, he's a singer-songwriter, musician. Oh, and by the way, Patrick, I have another. I could have a separate 10 questions here, by the way, that are all along the topic of how you managed to do this with your wife. Because I came home to record this interview, and my wife was like, "You're here this afternoon." I mean, no, I'm joking. I'm totally joking. But you and your wife are in a band.
Yeah.
It's called the Layawakes. Is the name of the band. That's a true story, right, Patrick?
Yeah. We make
Wow.
art together, and we exercise the art of making art together as husband and wife.
Unbelievable.
Sometimes.
Okay, that's
Sometimes well, sometimes not so well.
a whole other podcast,
Yet
buddy.
again, another podcast. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Anyway, that was question number 1. Next few are about music as well. Question number 2. Are you a better singer or a better guitar player?
I'm pass.
You're giving this a lot of thought. You really couldn't come up with an answer. Pass. Okay.
I hope I'm a better singer than a guitar player, because I'm not much of a guitar player.
These are your answers, buddy. It's okay. Question number 3. Okay, this might be hard. I know musicians probably hate this question, but I find it very interesting. And it might change from time to time, but let's come up with something if we can. Question number 3. Patrick, if you could name one band or artist that really encapsulates the spirit of Patrick Anderson musically. If you could say, I wish, like, that is me, if I could do that, that inspired you. You see where I'm going with this? Is there a single band or artist that fits this kind of description? Biggest influence, but it's beyond that. You know what I'm saying? What would be your answer for a singular band or artist?
Oh, this might be recency bias.
Yep. But it does change.
I want to say Stan Rogers because he just his spirit. When you mentioned spirit, I'm like, that guy. I just want to give that guy a hug.
He's a genius.
I loved his spirit, his music, but I could never. If I could be born with another voice, lifetime, have another. His big fat baritone voice, man, that thing.
I'm from Newfoundland.
He was such a player and such a deep soul. It wasn't just talent, but just the deep soul.
Do you know I'm from Newfoundland? I know he's not from Newfoundland, but
Right.
he's a big thing. Let me say one thing about Stan Rogers. Put it this way, Patrick. The song Barrett's Privateers,
Yeah.
okay, I believed that it was a sea shanty written in 1778.
Yeah.
And I was like old, right? Like I was late in life whenever you're like, wait, this guy wrote that? Like recently? Relatively?
Yeah.
I thought it was like an ancient song from, but anyway, this guy's a genius. Anyway, Patrick, I shouldn't be talking. I got to be asking questions. Question number 4. Last question about songs. These are tough, I'm sorry, but they're very important also. Question number 4. Best song to sing around a campfire.
My family, we can't close up shop without singing Country Roads by whoever the new guy know. John Denver.
There you go. Question number 5. Stupidest or funniest thing you've ever been asked about being in a wheelchair. And you cannot say, this interviewer 5 minutes ago talked about me walking off the court in my last game at the Paralympics. Stupidest or funniest thing you've ever been asked about being in a wheelchair.
The most recent might be that. Well, last night, the guy came up to me. He's like, "I think you're the guy with no legs, plays guitar, right?" I'm like, "I'm a guy with no legs." He was trying to tell me that he'd seen one of our concerts like 5 or 6 years before, but he started with, "You're that guy, right?" It's like, let's see. I need more information.
I guess. Question number 6. By the way, these were written before we started talking. I think you've kind of answered this already. Question number 6. Jordan or LeBron?
Sorry, LeBron. I gotta go with MJ. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, Patrick, I don't know who says LeBron. I don't know why this is a debate, to be honest.
Anyone under the age of 35.
People think this is a debate. I don't know who thinks it's a debate, but it is a debate. That's why I asked. Question number 7. It seems like this could be hard pickings as well from what you told about the stories of these teams you've been on. But the question number 7 is funniest teammate.
That's tough.
And why?
Yeah. You know what? James Truer. He and still is just a ball of laughs and a great spirit. But he was another deep soul. After we won in 2000, I was like, let's win again. What's the start of a dynasty? And he was like, He's cut me off. He's like, no, we're going to celebrate this gold medal tonight.
Wow.
So he was a deep dude as well, but man, that guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. All right, question number 8. This is the one question, by the way, everybody gets asked, no matter who you are. Question number 8 is personal best 1-rep max bench press.
Oh, I don't know. 100 pounds. It's not my
100 pounds.
It's not my forte.
100 pounds. It's in the books. Okay. Number 9. Best thing about living in New York.
Ooh, food. I think it might be the food.
Is your wife an American?
She's a dual citizen. She was born.
Bonus question.
Born in the States. Yeah.
Okay. And my final question to conclude our interview, Patrick, just simply, if you could single out one favorite Paralympic moment, what would it be?
This is going to be a little corny, and I've shared it before, but it's the favorite. It's when the final seconds were ticking off the clock in London, and we finally knew we were going to win gold. I was holding the ball, and I looked up in the crowd, and I saw my wife Anna wearing a big red dress, standing up, and you can see it on the broadcast. I point up in the stands, and I pointed at her, and we locked eyes from across the stadium. That was a special basketball moment and also a personal moment. Can't beat that.
Can't beat that. And what a way to conclude our interview. Patrick Anderson, you are everything I anticipated and more. Again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for doing this.
It was my pleasure. It was fun. Nice chatting with you, Dennis.
And with that, we'll sign off as I always do. Let's go Canada. Support Canadian athletes.